Good morning. Let's get straight to markets.
Take a look at the impact for the indices.
Factual. Succinct. All you need to know before your trading day starts. Subscribe to our newsletter, CNBC's Daily Open.
Welcome to Beyond the Valley, a CNBC tech podcast with Arjun Kharpal and Tom Chitty.
Beyond the Valley.
Germany's economy is driven by its manufacturing sector, but since the pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it's seen a slowdown, and Europe's largest economy has struggled as a result. But the country's tech industry is emerging as a shining light amid the gloom, with the sector expected to outperform the economy this year. In the third instalment of our look at Europe's leading tech hubs, our focus turns to Germany as we're joined by a special guest to discuss the country's vibrant network of startup hubs and the geopolitical hurdles in its way.
Beyond the Valley.
Arjun, before we introduce our guest, you were in Germany a few months ago, weren't you, at the factory of aerospace company Lilium? I'm sure we'll talk more about that company later on, but did you get a sense that the country was an exciting place for tech companies?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I've been traveling to Germany, mainly Berlin. That was my first time sort of in and around Munich, but mainly to Berlin over the past few years. And it's been really interesting to see sort of the tech scene grow from sort of the mid 2010s, sort of 2014, 15, through to now. It's been very vibrant. It's grown very quickly. There's different types of startups around in various different industries. It's been pretty exciting to watch, actually. It emerged as one of Europe's key tech hubs.
Okay, let's introduce our guest for this week. He is a partner at venture capital firm Headline, which has invested in a whole host of tech firms, including dating app Bumble, online marketplace Cameo, and French company Mistral AI. We've spoken about them before. He is also former president of the non-profit German Startup Association and says that he is committed to turbocharging entrepreneurship in Europe. Christian Miele, thank you for joining us on Beyond the Valley.
Thank you, Tom and Arjun. It's a privilege to be here.
Christian, I've asked our guests so far in this little series we're having on Europe's tech hubs a question about who they would rank or which country they would rank as their top three tech hubs in Europe. Where would you place your top three?
I think that these kind of rankings would vary like from year to year. So sometimes you will see like London at the top, sometimes you will see Paris at the top, and sometimes you will see Berlin at the top or Munich. But I think the reality is, and this is what you're saying, like the top three will probably always be a mix of Paris, London, and then Berlin or Munich.
Okay, and your number one, just right now, if you had to pick one?
I think like just in terms of capital inflow, it will be London, I think. But again, like these kind of rankings, they change and usually are driven by like one deal. I mean, if you have like one big growth round happening in Paris, it will be Paris next year in terms of capital. But what I can say is, and you said this earlier, Tom, that all of these hubs are becoming really vibrant by today.
Christian, just where are we speaking to you from? Whereabouts are you?
I'm in
based?
Berlin. I'm based in Berlin.
You are in Berlin, and would you say Berlin is Germany's key tech hub at the moment?
So the interesting thing is that, like, other than in the UK, like, you don't have this one city that like accumulates, like, let's say 80 to 90% of deal flow and capital invested. But in Germany, it's really like much more fragmented as the German economy is. So this year, Berlin is not the number one, but it's Munich. So last year or the year before, it was Berlin. And then the years before, it was Berlin. But like right now, Berlin and Munich are really battling each other.
I know Arjun wants to ask a whole host of questions. But before we do that, we'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. For our listeners, if you'd like to keep up to date on the world of tech, then the best place to start is the Beyond the Valley weekly newsletter. Packed with the best international tech stories from CNBC, you can subscribe by heading to cnbc.com/Beyond the Valley. Click on the subscribe button and it will drop in your inbox every Friday. And if you want to contact Arjun and I or have a question about a past episode or this episode, then email us at beyondthevalley@cnbc.com. Arjun, we do need to talk about Stat of the Week, or do you want to ask a question first, or do you want to get into Stat of the Week?
No, let's do Stat of the Week.
Okay. Christian, have you heard about Stat of the Week?
No.
Okay. So it's a game that we play every episode, And for this series, it's usually Arjun gives out a stat, and I have to try and work out what that stat is referring to. It's usually related to the episode that or the subject matter that we're talking about, though sometimes he throws in a few curveballs and it's completely unrelated. But for this little series we're doing, it's me versus our guest to see who gets closest to the correct answer. So, okay. So Arjun's going to give out the stat now, and then we will answer it at the end of the podcast.
So this week's stat of the week, Christian and Tom, is 6,300. 6,300.
6,300. Okay. Okay, Christian, just give us you sort of explain how it's slightly fragmented in terms of location of where sort of the tech hubs are in Germany, but give us a little bit of a broad summary, a broad overview of kind of where the German tech sector is right now. Is it in a strong place?
Yes, so it is in a strong place, but let me give you a little bit of a historic overview, which is probably also true for other startup hubs, but it has been happening in Germany and in Berlin and Munich in particular as well. So I think the developments in the Silicon Valley, and it's great that this podcast is called like Beyond the Valley. There have been three ingredients that made this hub successful in the Valley, and that was like strong talent from the leading universities. It was a lot of money available from government entities, but as well as like investors as a whole. And there were a lot of like really creative people who were trying to disrupt existing industries or come up with new innovation. For many years, I think other countries and cities in the world have tried to replicate what has been happening in the Silicon Valley as they realize that the economic engine that has been built there is super powerful. And in Germany, this has started like in 2000, 2004. And it was predominantly a copycatting nation. So like, startups in Germany were usually built on existing blueprints from the Valley. And that has enabled the German startup scene to attract talent, to make the first experiences, to build the right ecosystem and network of investors and talent and entrepreneurs. And then, like, I would say it was around 2015, 10 years later, when this second wave, I call it, of innovation started. The second wave of innovation was really this nucleus of startup people here in Germany, understanding that they do not only need to copycat the company from the US, but they could come up with like their own ideas, and they have made these experiences on how to start businesses. And that was a time when the ecosystem has really changed, I would say. Like a lot of things happened, a large shift from like B2C businesses to B2B software, a lot of like companies being built on problems that these entrepreneurs faced when they were building or working on their first company, etc. And I think now, another 10 years later, I'd say that like we are in the middle of the third wave, basically, where the ecosystem is becoming so large now that you have like in total millions of people already working in the sector, and the amount of like capital available and the amount of talent available and the interest of like entrepreneurs to start businesses is probably higher than ever before. I'm not surprised if this is like the same development in Paris and London and anywhere else in the world, but I think the big realization is that the Silicon Valley is not as special as it always thought. Of course, like there's still the greatest innovation coming from there, the biggest market caps coming from there. That's very natural. They were the first to start, but there's no reason why London, Paris, Munich, Berlin, whatever, Helsinki couldn't produce a $100 billion company in the next 10 to 15 years.
And Christian, that's a great overview, and you've touched on some really interesting points. What do you think, as you talk about this shift from the third to the second to the third wave, what do you think's underpinned some of this? When I look at some of the other startup hubs, you know, we're hearing recording from London at the moment. London typically had a very strong background in financial services. And so some of the first waves of the big startups you saw out of London were naturally in fintech. And it had a very strong position there. You look at some of the, and of course, you think about the universities that are in London, and you talk about France or some of the universities there, technical universities that have underpinned perhaps some of the AI companies companies that are coming out now as well. When you look at the German ecosystem across the country, what are the sort of facets, the features of the ecosystem that have underpinned this ability to grow and then to shift from, as you say, copycat to being more innovative?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that and that's a small difference between London and Berlin, I would say, is that like the low-hanging fruits within like the internet sector were B2C models, as I said earlier, where like it started with media, it went on with like social, and it went like onto e-commerce. And I'd say that like with the first experiences that were made here in Germany with like e-commerce businesses like Zalando sending shoes from A to B, or like a delivery hero sending a pizza from A to B, like this has enabled a lot of talented individuals to learn what it takes to build a company. And once you go through this and you understand what it means to hire people at a really fast rate, what it takes to actually build a product, what it takes to measure if this company is growing into the right direction, what it takes in order to raise money, etc., it has given a lot of people the skills that are required in order to start a business and scale it. And then I would say that like after this first wave of B2C innovation has happened, the founders just realized that the bigger opportunities are now probably within software, and the barriers to entry into these new fields would just be much lower because people understood that building a business usually follows a very similar kind of pattern. It is always the same thing, if you wish. And I think this has enabled the German startup ecosystem to become more diversified. And by the way, I would claim that London has produced a plethora of like really interesting companies, not only within fintech, but even outside. And there were very similar developments in e-commerce that you could follow, be it Deliveroo and others, even though Deliveroo doesn't have the same valuation as before. But I think what I'm trying to say is that like the nucleus of how these ecosystems got started are very similar. And then you would see a lot of entrepreneurs branching out of their original sectors, starting new businesses that they really care about.
And of course, I mean, for any ecosystem, as you say as well, Christian, you need the talent and some of these innovations develop. But the funding picture is something that's super important as well. When I knew there was a thought, and this was across Europe, across the board, in the earlier days, perhaps in the middle 2010s, that actually there was a big funding gap, right, with the US, that the late stage funding was very difficult to come by. Now, has that changed dramatically in your view in terms of the funding environment in Germany and I guess more broadly in Europe across the board?
So I think that this is a very natural thing that happens in inefficient markets in a way, right? I mean, there was always a funding crunch. Back in the days, there was a seed crunch, then there was a Series A crunch, then there was a growth crunch. And I think then what happened is that a lot of US investors got a lot more interested in the European continent, as a few really cool companies came from here, namely like firms like Spotify and even like companies like Zalando or Arjun or others. And that was the time when the zero interest rate environment plus the first successes coming from here would lead investors to really take this continent seriously. And I think just recently there was a statistic being published by the European Investment Fund that the last 10 to 15 years head-on-head comparison between European venture versus US venture would yield better results for Europe, even though probably the top decile looks different. So I want to be nuanced here. So the top decile in the US is probably much stronger. But like on average, as the whole panel, like the European VC firms and returns would be better than in the US. And I think people realize that, and that led to a little bit of a change in mentality where, you know, growth funds, late stage funds, etc. would come in. And so now to the second part of your question, I think we're in the middle of like figuring out like where this will end. Of course, like after the interest rate environment has changed and after the Ukraine war and after the COVID pandemic, a lot of things, this poly crisis on a macroeconomic level has led to a lot of uncertainty, not only in public markets, but in private markets as well. So it's, in my opinion, it's still in the middle of this development, and I cannot say how this is going to end. But I mean, the news have been full of like stories like the Tiger Global is shutting down, late stage investors are pulling out of the market. From the early stage side, I can say it remains very steady. It remains very exciting. So I think that is we need to sit this out a little more in order to see where it's going to land. I think the next 2 to 3 years are going to be super interesting in that regard.
Christian, are there any areas in tech which Germany is particularly strong? In London, we've seen that fintech, that area has been quite dominant. Over here, any particular areas in tech that Germany's focused on or particularly strong at?
I think I have to split this answer into two parts. So the first part is the proven winners, which I would say are basically in e-commerce, this first wave of innovation from 2004 onwards. That's the Zalandos of the world, the low-hanging fruits, as I love to call them. But then the second pillar would be B2B software, as I said earlier. I mean, you have few of the leading B2B software, enterprise software companies from Europe coming out of Germany, a Celonis, a Personio, and several others. And I do think that is also due to the fact that Germany's Mittelstand, the German manufacturing businesses, the German industrials, are very close to the kind of hubs that we were talking about earlier already. And I do think that this is a very natural thing for Germans to try and build software and to try to build products for these kind of businesses as they make up the German economy, basically.
Subscribe to the Squawkbox Europe Express podcast. Join Steve, Karen, and myself, Arabile, in unscripted and dynamic debate around the day's top stories with first and exclusive interviews of the best in business and global newsmakers, original points of view, and instant analysis of the latest business news and key market themes. Get set for the day ahead. Squawkbox Europe Express podcast, now available on Spotify, Apple Music, and Google Podcasts.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, Christian, Germany's history in terms of companies is fascinating. Obviously, such a strong automotive sector, very big industrial and manufacturing technology sector as well. And so as we look forward into the world where, and in particular, governments are speaking about strategic technologies, they talk about things like EVs, like robotics, AI, Internet of Things, all of these areas. It seems to me, Germany, just looking at the traditional companies that exist there, already has kind of a sort of advantage in many senses that if, companies like Mercedes or BMW, Audi, etc., can pivot successfully into these EV technologies and maybe even into autonomy, there are ways for some of the traditional large German companies to play a part in future technologies. Of course, it's a big if they can successfully transition into the modern world. But how much is that being spoken about in Germany right now?
It's a fantastic question. I love this question. So I would say that we are in the middle of this development happening right now. And I have no answer for you that is really concrete. But here's what I think. Either we're going to end up in some sort of an innovator's dilemma because the big corporations wouldn't realize the opportunity they have here, or we will see a world which you have just described, where the German industrials and the German manufacturing businesses understand the huge potential that is coming out of the let's say new frontier innovation in robotics, AI, and other let's say interferences between software and physical products. So I do think that Plan B will happen and will pan out and will play out. But I think it is a mentality question that Germans are still struggling and battling with. It goes into the right direction, I would say, but it's something where we probably need to push the gas to the metal. The pedal to the metal.
And I know it's always hard, as you mentioned, to give a concrete answer, but just give us your sense, because there's always this view, right, that the incumbents are too slow, too big to innovate, to move. The electric vehicle sector, I think, is a great example of that. When you look at a company like Tesla or some of the fast-moving Chinese EV players, which are quickly expanding to Europe, and there's talk of how big a threat they are to European electric vehicle makers as well. Just give us a sense from the traditional German industry point of view. Are they moving quick enough, or are they talking about it? What's your sense at the moment?
I mean, you pick probably one of the best examples that you could potentially pick in order to make Germans upset. Because I think that, as you said, I think the automotive sector is something that made us insanely strong globally. But then and this is the innovator's dilemma, I would say, par excellence, where German automotive manufacturers did not understand that transitioning to EV is probably part of the essential strategy that they need to pursue. And we're talking 2010, 2015 here now, when I still remember that the CEOs of the biggest car manufacturing companies from Germany would say that it is not going anywhere. And I think every one of these guys now regrets what they said back in the day. So it's not even 10 years ago when they said this. I do think that I hope it was some sort of a really painful learning for them, that they are not disregarding these new technologies just because they are still small, maybe in a year like 2015. But now you can see what happened, right? And by the way, I think it's the same thing for a lot of fintech products. And let's look at Revolut, which is just publishing their numbers everywhere because they're so great. I do think that a lot of banks probably underestimated the impact that Revolut could have on the consumer behavior. It's happening in many different kind of sectors. And yes, it was very painful for German automakers to realize that Tesla is coming for them. And now the Chinese are as well, right? I mean, it's not only Tesla anymore, but there's BYD and many others.
We got the sense when we were in Paris for this previous episode that the French tech sector is very good at promoting themselves, or at least getting the message out that this is a thriving, engaged, both politically and from the business side of things in tech. How's Germany's, publicity going, shall we say, when it comes to the tech sector?
I have to say, I'm the former president of the German Startup Association, so everything I'm saying now is basically as the investor Christian Miele, right? So I do think that when I was still in charge of the German Startup Association, there was always this connotation that Germany and France are pretty much on an eye level, and a little bit better here, a little bit better there, and so that was always this eye on eye race. But I would 100% agree with what you said, Tom, that France has been doing a phenomenal job in promoting startups and to promote innovation. And to be honest, I always look jealously to Macron, who really put this on his agenda. This is not happening in Germany. And if you ask me, it's one of the biggest challenges that we have here. That mentality needs to change. Germans do not promote startups the way the French do. And you could say that it's a lot of marketing, blah, blah. But the reality is that marketing, blah, blah, can often lead to some sort of change in behavior and change of perception. And I do think that the French did a much better job here over the last 10 years, and are now probably basically seeing the first successes coming out of that. And I do think that Germany will probably follow them, which is great. But it's a very German thing to be much more nuanced on these kind of things and don't promote it too hard. But I think we need to change here.
Christian, I think you bring up a lot of good points, and Tom too. I think one of the interesting things from traveling to France over the past few years is particularly that the leadership from the top, President Macron, and the way he's quite vocal and seen with startups. And I think, you speak to a lot of the French tech entrepreneurs, they say that over the past, let's say, 9-10 years, there's been huge shifts in policy around things like labor laws and investment, et cetera, et cetera. Is the German government as supportive and as strategic about technology at this point as it should be, in your view? I remember a few years ago, I used to travel to Berlin to the IFA show, or IFA, the big sort of electronics industrial show. The former Chancellor Angela Merkel would turn up and give a speech most years and talk about sort of the strength of German industry, etc. But it never felt to me at that point like there was a forward-thinking strategic approach to technology. Has that changed? Is there one now with the current government? And if not, I mean, what do you think needs to happen?
So I do think that they have realized how important innovation is to a country's economic engine. Full stop. I think they understand it, but the way how they put this into execution probably still has a little bit of development potential. And just to give you an example, which is probably really easy to understand, Macron really is interested in startups. I mean, he has friends in the startup scene. He has regular dinners. He has regular meetups with these founders and investors. And in Germany, I think it's still not happening that way. We have a Minister of Finance and a Minister of Economy who are both very interested and who understand that technology is really, really important. But our chancellor, like, he's not like Macron and really interested in doubling down on this. I had him once, like, on a big event for like the Startup Association, but that was only one time. And I do think that, you know, there's a lot of upside for this kind of innovative sectors where the politicians can also do a lot by just being there and meeting up and like, exchanging thoughts. So I think everything that you have said and that you have alluded to is right here. The government wants it, and they did a few good things. Like, so for example, like we fought for a reform of the German stock options to attract international talent and to, you know, create a level playing field with international leading startup hubs. And that was like big successful. But there's more that we need. And I hope that the German government realizes that too.
I'm sure yourself, Christian, and others involved in startups, founding them, investing in them, would like as minimal government involvement as possible. But one of the realities, I think, in the modern world is that technology has become so intertwined with politics, and in particular with geopolitics. And in Europe and in Germany in particular, you see that play out with some of the battles between the EU, Germany, and China, and trying to figure out the relationship there, as well as with the US in many senses as well. Does, you know, as an investor in startups, and as you look at the kind of German tech scene right now, how much does geopolitics have a bearing on what's happening in your world, particularly as we begin to talk and Germany begins to have a very strong footing in technologies like AI, generative AI?
So to be honest, I think this is going to be the question du jour for the next 10 years. It is such an important aspect that you've highlighted here, and I do not have the answer. I feel like that politics and the government should stay out of like the economy. That is what I think. Like classic Adam Smith, invisible hand, let the market do what the market does. I think that is where I'm coming from. That is how I was educated. But then there's another realization that probably we are living in a time where globalization has led to much more of an overlap between the public authorities and private investors and private entrepreneurship. And let's be honest, I mean, in Europe, a lot of the limited partners in venture capital funds are usually like public investors. So if I'm not mistaken, the European Investment Fund is invested in 99% of all startups in Europe indirectly through their managers that they've backed. And this is probably going to be the development for the next few years too. And if you look, and you've said it yourself, if you look at China and if you look at the US, there's a lot of interference from the government too. I mean, the Silicon Valley, like we talked about it earlier, was basically funded by the US Army and by like public entities from the start. So I think that while I would love to see a world where entrepreneurs do what entrepreneurs do and like politicians do what politicians do, these worlds are growing much more closely. And now to your last point, I feel like that, yes, a lot of the innovative products that are being started today by design need some sort of cooperation between public and private players. You touched upon AI. There are even easier things to talk about that are easier to understand with like defense or like space tech or like anything that touches like the societal tissue that we have and European sovereignty. Like you can't do it without having some sort of a relationship to public authorities. And it's happening everywhere in the world. Do I think it's a good development? No, not from my educational point of view where I come from. But is it the only thing that we can do? Is it the only option? Probably yes. And I have no idea where this is going in the next 10 years, but it doesn't feel like that the public authorities and the private ecosystems are going to diverge more, but they're probably going to go closer together.
Can we talk about AI for a little bit and Germany's tech sector when it comes to AI? Where is it at? Where's the sort of relationship between government and business on that front? And is it an exciting time in the German tech sector when it comes to AI? Because it certainly felt like that in Paris.
Yes, it's happening. I mean, I think we feel it everywhere, and it's not. I wouldn't say it's a German, UK, French thing, but it's really like a global phenomenon now that entrepreneurs everywhere in the world realize the potential that's coming with AI, and. We have seen, so the first development after ChatGPT was released, and you probably all remember this moment when suddenly everybody was talking about it, but there are large language models being built on the European continent for exactly the reasons that you have mentioned before, which is European sovereignty. And I do think the premise of Mistral and Aleph Alpha and now Holistic, which has been started, or H as it's called now. Everybody's trying to become this OpenAI of Europe because Europeans feel like we want to have our own large language model that is still a little bit different from OpenAI and the Chinese equivalents. And then the next iteration is going to be what's happening on the side of the small language or mid language models that are being used for certain vertical applications, etc. And we do see a lot of these companies coming from everywhere right now. It doesn't matter where you look. Somebody's building something on AI on any of these large language models.
Christian, there was in terms of that sort of European growth in AI. We started off the show talking about the Valley, but we are talking beyond the Valley at the moment. The Europeans really lost out in many senses in the internet age, the social media age, search to the Googles, Metas, Amazons, Apples of the world. When it comes to AI, and particularly when it comes to these large language models, is this the chance now for Europe to really go out there and create one of these global giants?
It absolutely is. The truth, though, is that I do think, and now coming back to your question from before, it will require a lot of things to happen in parallel and a lot of joint forces to work on this. I called it the Manhattan Project of the 21st century, where, in my opinion, European governments and European investors and European founders would need to join forces and to build a real behemoth here. Like the Manhattan Project back in the days in Los Alamos. But I think the challenge is that a lot of more resources are being thrown onto the problem in the US and in China. So I'm still a little bit cautious to be overly optimistic that we are going to make it here. But I do think that every time we miss out on something like that, and every time it becomes more public and becomes more often miss out moment where everybody's like, why did we not do that? It's so crazy. We had everything in our hands to do it. I think it will help to create this right layer, this right level of frustration to do it better next time around. And there's still a chance. I don't know. It's probably not the large language model that is going to become the dominant super company from Europe, but maybe one of the applications that are being built upon one of these LLMs.
And just from the development point of view of AI in Europe more broadly, not just in Germany, but how helpful or unhelpful is the quick movement from the EU to regulate AI with the EU AI Act? It was probably the fastest piece of legislation I've ever seen come out of the EU. And, there's many who have said, well, this is just not whilst we need healthy, responsible development of the technology, regulating it this early on is just going to be anti-innovative. And what's your view on that?
I mean, because this is CNBC, I can't use the words that I have in my mind right now. So I'm trying to be a little bit more diplomatic here. I think that like people from Brussels who are trying to regulate AI that have really no clue on what AI is and how it can be used and what the kind of challenges are in building it and like how important it is. It's an issue by itself. And I do think that this EU AI Act was, as you said, Arjun, like regulating something before you even know what the potential is and what we need to do with it is probably the wrong kind of approach. But still, I think we have to live with what we have. And we need to make sure that like we do whatever is possible in order to like still create like great innovation on the European continent, even though we have a lot of like these regulators running around in Brussels.
Christian, it's been brilliant to talk to you, but before we let you go, we have of course got to do Stat of the Week. So you can decide who gets to answer Arjun's stat first. Arjun, do you want to give it back to us again? Yeah, just a reminder, the stat is 6,300. Christian, I'll let you go first since you are our special guest on this show.
Okay, like let me try. Like I trend to say that this is the number of companies founded in Germany last year, but I like the number that I had in my mind was 5,500. So I might be a little bit off here.
It's not quite right. Let me give Tom a go at this.
The number of AI companies that have been founded in the last 12 months in Germany.
No, kind of a little bit of what Tom was saying. Christian, I'll give you one more shot at this, and Tom, I'll give you one more shot, and then I'll let you know the answer.
Okay, then it's AI companies being founded in Europe last year.
A lot closer. Tom, I'll give you the last go.
The number of AI companies that have been founded in Europe so far this year.
We're knocking on the door, guys. The answer is the number of startups in the European Union working on generative AI currently. That's according to the Applied AI Institute for Europe close, and Tom, the right? European Commission.
I feel not ashamed. Like we were very close.
Very close. But one more bonus point. Where are or which country has the biggest proportion of those generative AI startups in the EU?
France.
I would have said France as well.
You're both wrong. It's Germany. Germany has 19.9% of those Gen AI companies. France is second place with 17.5%, followed then by the Netherlands with 10.9%. So those three together.
That's the best example for like bad marketing from Germans. Like we're not talking about it.
I was going to say, you've really lived up to the reputation there.
Exactly.
Christian, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much for giving us all your time. But that's it for this episode. Before we go, please follow and subscribe to the show, and you can rate us. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arjun.
Thank you, Tom.
We'll be back next week for another episode of Beyond the Valley. Goodbye.
Beyond the Valley.